There we go. Won't be of any surprise to you that I brought along another photo opportunity. So this is Gracie. Gracie named in honor of George Burns' wife, and so that means that both the theme of Gracie and Gracie Allen is never.
Place a period where God has placed a comma.
Boy, that sounds pretty pathetic, doesn't it? Can we say it? Never put a period where God has put a comma. Well, Gracie went with me to visit at Camp Adams this summer. I was not able to get over to Pilgrim Cove, but I was able to stop once each week during our time during the different camps this summer at Camp Adams. And so each time I joined the crew for lunch, we sang a grace together and also had a little visit from Gracie. In case some of you are wondering, as I understand it, African elephants, the females also have tusks. And so we're in good shape here. When you get to play with Gracie, because you'll all get to play with Gracie in case you need some more selfies, and the turtle is still going around, so if you haven't taken a picture with the old turtle and posted it up, make sure you do that. But take your picture with Gracie, and there's a little lever inside. You can curl her trunk if you want to, okay? So Gracie went to visit, and I told the story, and all of you know the story, but it's a good UCC story. It's worth repeating again and again and again. There is a story about a village of blind mice. I like to talk about the mice because the mice do not yet have a caucus in the United Church of Christ. And so we will have the village of blind mice. They had heard about an elephant. They'd never experienced an elephant. A circus was coming through town. They sent out a delegation to visit the elephant, find out what an elephant was all about. They came back and they began their reporting out. And the one who had come in contact with the trunk said, elephant is like a writhing snake. Another one, touching the tusk, said an elephant is like a sharp spear, or like a huge carpet on a line, or like a moving mountain, or like a pillar going up to the sky, or like a rope dangling from a tree. And one ending to that story is that they are still arguing about what an elephant is like. But I like to say that there is a UCC ending to the story, and that is that they all talked together and listened to each other, and together they had a more complete idea of what an elephant is all about, or a more complete idea about what God is all about, or justice, or truth. And so they learned from each other. Now there is a gorgeous children's picture book that's illustrated by Ed Young about the blind mice. That's where I got the mouse idea from. Blind mice and the elephant. But he puts a little twist to the story. And for me, that little twist destroys the story because he makes it into a modern parable rather than a postmodern parable. And so as he tells the story, the different colors of mice begin reporting out and squabbling. And then one mouse comes and says, wait, you've got it all wrong. It's all of these things. And so there is the expert that comes in and says, no, you don't have the truth, but I do have the truth, and so here's what the truth is. And so I think that he's destroyed the whole story, because the point of the story of unity and diversity is that we understand ourselves to be one, but the diversity brings us a richness. And in that diversity, there are multiple voices, and those voices all share their experience of what the truth is about. And that we all learn from each other. And most of the folks that talk about these days about what it means to be the church, what it means to be an organization, will talk about the flattening of the hierarchy. So there's no longer an expert that solves everything. And we all long for the expert. We long for the Savior. We long for the Messiah. We long for the person who's going to come and make everything right for us. But that, in most cases, that is not the reality. Today, problems are harder to describe, harder to define, and often you're not figuring out how to solve a problem, but you're figuring out how to live with a problem. And you figure out how to live with the problem by everybody sharing together and talking with each other so that we all benefit from each other's wisdom. So I've talked extensively with you about my dislike personally for strategic planning. And as some of you are good at strategic planning, I applaud you for that, and I'm not telling you you can't do it anymore. But in my experience, what has really worked in ministry is organic planning. And organic planning, rather than trying to identify the problem and the steps toward the solution of the problem, organic planning is to see how the Spirit is speaking to different people. And then to see if there is a way in which the Spirit is saying similar things to a group of people and bring those group of people together to network, and then to fan, encourage, nourish, and see if that takes on some life. When we had a recent meeting with conference ministers, the consultants said strategic planning is out the window, and what is the planning process now is experimentation. That things are moving so quickly that it's hard for us to define things, it's hard for us to set something out 5 years in advance, much less 10 or 15, and that all we could do is keep trying things out to find out what works now at this time and in this place. So what has organic planning meant for the Central Pacific Conference? What is my belief in doing things that way meant here? I believe that there are a couple of examples, and there are lots more, but I'm only going to point to a couple of those examples today. That the annual meeting planning committee started out as some conversations with people saying, you know, there are a lot of downsides to us meeting in local churches. We don't have enough time with each other. There aren't that many churches that can host it. And people started saying we need to put more content in. We need to give more opportunity for people to build relationships. Finally, that came to the point, and I was part of those conversations, it came to the point where Don Frew and Gene Avison brought forth a proposal to come to this kind of a venue, to a destination venue over 2 nights. That first year and two, it was Gene and Don that put a lot of the energy into it, with some other people helping them, but they were the focal point. By the time we got to the second and third year, Dave Sutton had stepped up, Gail D became active, and now instead of 2 people carrying the whole thing with some assistance, we had a group of 20-some people. Can everybody who worked on this annual meeting please stand up? If you either work to plan or if you are working now to help it come into being, to happen. Where are all those folks? Thank you. In much the same way, compensation guidelines, we didn't have the time, the bandwidth, we'd say, we didn't have the time to deal with compensation issues, but we had a couple people that were concerned. Jenny brought her issue about parental leave, and we had some other clergy that said, yeah, I've got time to work on that, and I have just been in awe of the work that group did, with the thoroughness that they did it, and it was a great service to the conference. But it was something that was done by a group of people that had a passion, and that I said, you've got the passion, please do that for us. And so that's how it happened. Climate Action Network, I started hearing from people, particularly John Boonstra and his desire to lead pastoral ministry so that he could focus. But when Janet Parker came to town to talk about maybe moving to the left coast, we talked about her passion for environmental justice. When I interviewed Bob and Natalie Becker, they talked about their passion. And so I started to push those people together, introduce them to each other, sent some of them to Cleveland to a training for people to provide leadership on the issue of environmental justice. And then suggested that they might want to bring a proposal to do an annual meeting on that theme. And so we got from just a little bit of a passion all the way to this place, and I call that organic planning. And then the Palestine-Israel Network also. It was clear early on, John Hickox had a passion, Diane Doolin had a passion. I wasn't aware how many people in the conference had a passion, but I encouraged that and tried to get people together so that they could find strength in each other and support in each other. And so I want to say that if you have a passion about something, if you feel a call to something, make it known. Let me know, let some other people know. Write an article for Rolling Justice, write an article for Beyond the Way, and see if there are other people who also share that passion. And if there are, then we'll bring you together, and we'll then have that strength of numbers to be able to accomplish the thing that he cares so deeply about. Now, if we go back to the Palestine-Israel Network, as I became aware of how important it was to some of the folks in the Central Pacific Conference, I was invited to go on what proved to be a controversial trip to Israel-Palestine, and I just returned from that 9-day trip last week Friday, so not very long ago. And it was after a ceasefire finally held. We weren't quite sure for a while if we were going to be able to go on the trip. But I made sure that I met with our national officers and with folks in the conference that I knew had a concern about this issue. This trip was sponsored by a group called Fair Witness for Christians for Fair Witness in the Middle East. And it's a group that's generally understood to be a pro-Palestinian group. Some people, a pro-Israeli group, thank you very much for assistance in the front row. A pro-Israeli group, some would say a Zionist group. But they were offering to pay for me to go on the trip, and I said, whether you believe it or not, I'm going on this trip because I want to be of support for your passion, and I need to be on the ground. I want to see the wall. I want to see what's going on there. At the encouragement of both the folks in the conference that had this passion and our wider church ministry team, I was encouraged, and also they provided some financial support for me to extend my stay for 2 more days to visit with some of our partners in the Christian Palestinian partners in the Middle East. And that was a very valuable part of the trip, so I'm grateful both for the encouragement and the financial support to do that. So the trip began with the portion, the 7 days for the Christians for Fair Witness. And I do want to say that I think that we got heard diverse voices. And this is part of the reason that I wanted to go on the trip, because we claim to be a people that says, y'all come. We also claim to be a people that are tolerant and accepting. And so at the very least, that means that we should be willing to listen to opposing viewpoints when we're trying to come to a decision. And so I said, I'm going to listen to some opposing viewpoints. And I know that there's a danger in that, and there was a fear that I would, as the phrase goes, drink the Kool-Aid, or that I would be brainwashed into a particular position. But I did a lot of homework before I went, and I went knowing that I would get a particular perspective. I was surprised at the diversity of voices. We started going to Bethlehem the first day, to the West Bank, to Dheisheh refugee camp, which is not a tent refugee camp, but an urban refugee camp that has existed since 1967. We talked to a Palestinian Christian and a young Muslim man, a Palestinian, who both talked about what the occupation had meant to them. We talked for 3 hours one morning to the architect of the wall. We talked to an inspector from the Israeli police who had been on site for 48 of the suicide bombings that had taken place during the Second Intifada in 2002. We talked to an Israeli Defense Force, a lieutenant colonel who's also a lawyer, who talked about how they were interpreting the deaths in Gaza during the recent campaign. We also talked with Yossi Klein Halevi, who is an American Jew who wrote a book called At the Entrance to the Garden of Eden. And he talked about the 2 different narratives about who the land belonged to, the Israeli narrative and the Palestinian narrative. We also went to Ramallah, to the current headquarters for the Palestinian Authority, and we talked to Dr. Shataya, who is one of the 2 primary negotiators for the Palestinian Authority, has been part of the peace talks all the way along, and he heard his view of things. As I recall, Dr. Shataya was still talking about the possibility of a 2-state solution. Many of the Israelis were talking about the need for a 2-state solution, but almost without exception, the Palestinians that we talked to said that their dream would be to have one democratic country where everyone could live together. And if you know a lot of the story and have looked at the pictures, the West Bank is so broken up into pieces that in some ways it makes the most sense to figure out a way to do one country together. But after listening to all of that, I visited with Christian partners, with Sabeel, with Kairos Palestine, with Dayer that does cultural development of Palestinian people, with the YWCA, with the Tent of Nations, and heard about all of the problems with the settlements and all of the problems with the proposed peace agreements. And by the time I finished with everything, I was pretty much at the place where I began. And that is, while I feel a great deal of respect for the Israeli people and for all that they have accomplished, I think that in this situation, they hold all of the power, they hold all of the cards. They have been occupying the people since 1968, some of them since the 67, some of those people have been occupied or driven off their lands in 1947 during the War of Independence, 48. And if this situation is going to change, I believe that it's Israel that has to change it, because the Palestinians have no power to change it. And so I think it's entirely appropriate for us to make a prophetic statement to say it's time for this to change. And so I support the boycott, divestment, and sanction resolution that we have before us. I'm glad also, though, I'm pleased to have those friendly amendments that came in, because I think that for us to speak prophetically is not enough, that we need to work to make sure that we are building relationships with our interfaith partners, particularly with the Jewish community in the Central Pacific Conference, if we can find a way to do that. I think we do need to find a way to speak out against the use of violence by Hamas and in the future Hezbollah, to make sure that we are saying that we are clear that we are speaking out for peace. I think to speak in favor of peace is not anti-Semitic. It is not anti-Jew. It is anti-policy of the Israeli government that has allowed this occupation to go on for all of these years. So I think that the state of the conference is very good at this time. I'm pleased with the passions and with all the people that are coming and working on things. I'm pleased with the continuing wonderful leadership of ministers who have been around for a long time, but also excited about these new folks that are coming to join us. And so I thank you this day, and I'm grateful that I'm here to serve with you as your conference minister. Thank you.